Welcome back to her Fireside Stories. I raised my grandkids for 15 years, changed diapers, packed lunches, sat front row at every school play, and when I was diagnosed with cancer, my daughter told me to hire a nurse and stay out of her way. I wish I were exaggerating. I thought the hardest part of growing old would be the illness, the frailty. But no one tells you the real heartbreak is realizing the child you sacrificed everything for no longer sees you as worth the trouble. My name is Lucille Warner. I'm 65, and I've been many things in my life: a wife, a mother, a grandmother. But this is the story of how I stopped waiting for love that never came and finally chose myself. I never imagined the day I'd look into my own daughter's eyes and see something close to contempt. A chill so profound it made me question every sacrifice I'd ever made, but that's exactly where I found myself. One bleak afternoon staring into a face I'd once cherished more than my own life and wondering how in the world we'd come to this. My name is Lucille Warner, a 65-year-old grandmother living in a modest single-story home on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. I wear my short, wavy silver hair pinned back behind my ears these days, partly because styling it takes energy. I'd rather spend elsewhere, and partly because I no longer feel the need to fuss. When you've confronted what I have, your priorities rearrange themselves. For the longest time, I thought I understood what it meant to love unconditionally. I left my husband, Gerald, when I was in my late 40s, pulling myself out of a household where every day was defined by his sharp tongue and quiet cruelty. Back then, it felt like the bravest thing I'd ever do, the hardest mountain to climb. But I was wrong. The real challenge came later when my daughter Marianne turned on me for leaving for breaking our family. She was in her early 20s, and somehow she saw me as the betrayer. I tried to stay in Marianne's life to remain a steady presence. Soon enough, she had two kids of her own, Asher and Lily, and divorced her husband within a few years of marriage. It was as if I'd stepped back in time watching her walk a similar road. I moved into a little guest space behind her house, determined not to let my grandchildren feel the emptiness I once knew. For 15 years, I cooked meals, mended scrapes, drove them to soccer practice and choir rehearsals. I was the grandmother who never missed a recital or a school science fair. All I asked for was a little kindness in return. But Marianne never softened. If anything, she hardened, snapping at me to stop babying the kids, rolling her eyes whenever I tried to share a piece of advice or a story from my own past. Eventually, the exhaustion I felt wasn't just emotional, it was physical. Some nights I'd collapse into bed with an aching heart and an even more aching body. When the doctor confirmed it was cancer, aggressive and fast-moving, I expected Marianne to step up, if only for the sake of her children's grandmother. Instead, she told me to hire a nurse like I was a stranger who'd simply become inconvenient. A single moment can ignite a fire within. And for me, that moment was when Marianne brushed off my diagnosis so casually. I had spent years, decades, really keeping her household afloat, making sure her children were fed, clothed, and nurtured, while she pursued her high-stress career. Yet she acted as though my illness were a minor pothole in her meticulously planned life. Her words, "You should probably hire a nurse," Mom, rang through my mind like a cruel echo. I felt the anger, the hurt, the disappointment, all swirling inside me in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel for a very long time. It wasn't that I expected her to quit her job or devote every hour of the day to me, but I had at least hoped for basic human concern. A ride to the doctor, an offer to help with groceries, maybe even a shoulder to lean on. Anything that reflected I wasn't just a burden. I hired Ramona Bass, a 38-year-old nurse with cropped chestnut hair that shimmered with subtle highlights, the way sunlight glimmers on a forest river. She arrived on a drizzly Oregon morning carrying a simple black tote bag full of medical supplies and what I'd later recognize as a reservoir of quiet compassion. From the moment Ramona stepped over my threshold, I felt the air in the room shift. She was calm, deliberate in how she spoke, and her kindness never felt forced. "Mrs. Warner," she asked politely, offering her hand. "Lucille," I corrected. Just Lucille. Within a week, Ramona had organized my medications, restocked my fridge with easy-to-eat foods, and even arranged the living room furniture so I could navigate the space without risking a fall on days when I felt too weak to stand unassisted. It was more than just efficiency. She saw me, recognized me as a person, not a task. And that was something I hadn't felt in a long while, especially not with Mary Ann. In those early weeks, I noticed Ramona's interactions with Asher and Lily, too. Despite Marianne's aloofness, my grandchildren were still coming around, drawn by the routine we'd established long ago. They'd eye Ramona cautiously at first, but within days, Lily was giggling at Ramona's corny jokes, and Asher found himself staying in the kitchen a little longer, curious about the nurse's travel stories from her days volunteering abroad. It warmed me in a way I can't quite articulate to see someone actually making an effort to connect. Marianne's response to Ramona's growing presence was swift and tense. She showed up one afternoon with her signature sleek black bob swaying as she stormed through the doorway, barely acknowledging Ramona, who was tidying the kitchen counters. My daughter's heels clacked on the linoleum, each step brimming with pent-up frustration. "She's here every day," Marianne demanded, setting her oversized purse on the table with a thud. She glanced around as though expecting to find something amiss, a stack of unpaid bills, a sign that Ramona was squandering my money, or maybe even evidence of neglect. "She's helping me," I replied evenly. The subtle tremor in my voice was more from my illness than fear. I had reached a point where I refused to cower. "She's doing what I can't do alone anymore." Marianne snorted, folding her arms across her chest. "I guess it's convenient." She gave Ramona a once-over. "Must cost a fortune, though." Ramona stayed quiet, focusing on rearranging the fruit bowl. I could tell she was trying not to intrude, but her eyes flickered with concern as she overheard my daughter's dismissive tone. The tension was palpable, and for a moment it felt like I was seeing a child's tantrum, not a grown woman's protective stance. "It's worth every penny," I said softly, meeting Marianne's gaze. "And she has a name, Ramona." That conversation set the tone for the next few weeks. Marianne would drop by never with groceries or well wishes, just with her phone in hand, scrolling through social media or responding to work emails. She didn't bother to hide her discontent, rolling her eyes whenever she saw Ramona help me from the couch to the porch or support me as I navigated the hallway. "You're going to lose your independence," Marianne warned on more than one occasion, as if letting Ramona help meant I was surrendering my dignity. But independence isn't just about walking unaided or handling chores. Sometimes it's about choosing who stands beside you, who advocates for you, when you can't advocate for yourself. And in that regard, I'd never felt more in control because I was finally inviting into my life someone who treated me like a human being rather than some relic or obligation. As the weeks rolled on, my health ebbed and flowed in unpredictable waves. Some mornings, I'd feel almost like my old self sipping coffee on the porch, enjoying the soft Oregon mist, listening to birds flit from tree to tree. Other days, I barely found the strength to sit up in bed, my body ravaged by both the cancer and the treatments meant to fight it. Ramona adapted seamlessly to my fluctuations. If I had a strong day, she'd encourage me to walk a little around the garden. We'd planted together tomatoes, herbs, and a few vibrant marigolds to keep pests away. She had a gentle way of prodding me toward activities that made me feel alive, reminding me that I wasn't just an illness wrapped in a frail body. On weaker days, she'd set up a pillow fort on the couch, drape my favorite quilt over my legs, and read aloud from the newspaper or a novel. She never made me feel helpless. Rather, she offered the kind of unwavering support I'd yearned for from my own family. Marianne, for her part, hovered at the periphery of my life, like a storm cloud perpetually threatening rain. She'd pop in, glance at her watch, and ask with a distinct chill, "Everything going okay here?" Her questions were always laced with suspicion, as though she expected to catch Ramona pilfering from my wallet or rummaging through locked drawers. Sometimes she'd direct her inquiries at Asher or Lily. Has Nurse Ramona been acting weird? Buying herself things on Grandma's card, implying that Ramona's kindness had to be motivated by something other than genuine concern. Despite Marianne's efforts to sow mistrust, the kids seemed to sense the dissonance. Asher had inherited my fondness for the underdog. At 13, he was old enough to observe and form his own opinions. Lily, only 9, was more sensitive, easily picking up on tension, but not always understanding its source. Over time, they both gravitated toward Ramona's warmth, confiding in her about school projects and personal dreams. Marianne's reaction to that was as predictable as it was heartbreaking. She started finding new ways to keep the kids from visiting as often. A sudden overscheduling of extracurricular activities, last-minute sleepovers at friends' houses, anything to sever the growing bond they had with Ramona, and by extension with me. Still, for every barrier Marianne put up, Ramona found a gentle way around it, from late-night phone calls to FaceTiming Lily through a tablet so we could chat together when she couldn't come over. Through it all, I began to realize that what I wanted, needed, was someone willing to champion me in a battle I'd fought alone for too long. When the doctor asked if I had a support system, I smiled vaguely, nodding toward Ramona, who had accompanied me to the appointment. The truth was, she was my primary support. Legally, Marianne might still be my next of kin, but in practice, Ramona filled every gap, from driving me to chemotherapy sessions to reminding me gently to drink water, even when the nausea was relentless. There's a difference between someone who's bound to you by blood and someone who chooses to stand by your side. For me, that distinction grew clearer by the day. But being cared for after decades of self-reliance and silent giving was both comforting and unsettling. It made me reflect on my past, on my marriage to Gerald, and how I endured his manipulations, thinking I had to stay for Marianne's sake, on how I tiptoed around his moods, how I excused his behavior, always giving him the benefit of the doubt, and then, ironically, how Marianne turned around and claimed I was the one who ruined the family by leaving him. I kept thinking, why do I always have to be the villain? In the narrative of my own life, why couldn't I be allowed to make a choice that served me without being punished for it later? A memory from Marianne's childhood often came to mind. She was about 7, and she'd run home crying because some older kids teased her about the pigtails she used to wear. I'd consoled her, braided her hair in a different style, told her she was beautiful, no matter what anyone said. We spent hours discussing how other people's words only held power if she believed them. It felt like a defining moment back then, one of those instances when you know you're shaping your child's self-worth. Now I wondered, had all that love been lost on her? Or had the bitterness she later harbored toward me overshadowed every kind thing I'd ever done? I tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing on the here and now. But sometimes the past is a storm you can't simply dismiss. It churns beneath the surface, coloring every interaction in ways you can't predict or control. And in my case, it was about to rear its head more violently than ever before. The turning point came on a day that should have been celebratory. I just received a slightly better prognosis from my oncologist. Nothing miraculous, just a sign that the treatments were slowing the cancer's progress. Ramona and I shared relieved smiles in the car ride home, the hint of spring in the air offering a fragile sense of hope. Maybe I had more time than I'd feared, but when we pulled up to the driveway, Marianne's car was already there, parked at an angle that suggested frustration or haste. We found her in the living room, arms folded, jaw set, glaring at Ramona like she was a trespasser. I had to wait outside for 10 minutes. She snapped. Where were you at the clinic? I replied, voice calm but firm. I told you yesterday. Her impatience brimmed over. I need to talk to you alone. She cut Ramona a look that screamed, Go away! Ramona glanced at me, and I gave her a slight nod to indicate it was okay. She retreated to the kitchen quietly, always respectful of my boundaries. Marianne's gaze softened momentarily as she registered how pale I was, how frail. But the moment passed quickly. She launched into a diatribe about how the neighbors were talking, how people believed Ramona was moving in on my finances, exploiting my weakened state. She even tossed out the phrase gold digger, which made my stomach turn. I listened silently until she finished, my hands trembling on the armrest. Ramona has done more for me in a few months than you have in years. Marianne, I said, she makes sure I eat. She helps me to appointments. She respects me. I tried not to raise my voice, but the emotion cracked through. You could have done any of those things at any time, but you didn't. Her eyes flashed with anger. I have a career, kids' responsibilities. I'm not some paid caretaker. No, I replied, voice shaking. You're my daughter. Marianne's lips pressed into a thin line. She seemed on the verge of an outburst or an apology, some admission that might bridge the chasm between us. Instead, she spun on her heel and stormed out the front door. And there it was, the sound of my daughter leaving me behind again. I was left alone in the living room, feeling a swirl of emotions, sadness, anger, and a surprising wave of relief. Marianne had come in like a storm, and now that the storm had passed, the air felt clearer. If only for a moment, Ramona poked her head out of the kitchen, her cropped chestnut hair glinting in the overhead light. Her eyes questioned if I was okay. Did you hear all that? I asked softly. She hesitated. I heard enough to know you need a cup of tea. I nodded, exhaustion settling into my bones. While she filled the kettle, I closed my eyes and replayed the conversation in my head. Every word from Marianne felt like a dagger, aimed at discrediting Ramona, and by extension, undermining my ability to choose for myself. That was the heart of it. Marianne still believed she had the right to decide what was best for me, even though she rarely showed up when I truly needed her. When Ramona brought me tea, we sat together in a quiet solidarity. She set a warm hand over mine. Do you want me to leave? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I don't want to cause you stress. No, absolutely not, I said, placing my other hand over hers. This house is as much yours as it is mine these days. You've earned that spot. Her eyes watered at my words. She'd never been one to wear her emotions openly, but I could tell this whole ordeal was taking a toll on her. The rumors, the sideways glances from neighbors, none of it was fair. She was doing her job, and far beyond that, she was caring for me in a way no one else ever had, including my own flesh and blood. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marianne's accusations were just the beginning. She'd never relinquish control without a fight. If she suspected that Ramona had any legal footing, if, for instance, I decided to will anything to her, Marianne would wage a campaign to tear her down. And the scariest part, people might believe her. As a society, we often assume that when children and parents clash, it's the outsider who must be at fault. But in my life, the roles had reversed. My daughter was the interloper on my well-being, and Ramona was the one shielding me. With growing dread, I recognized that my estate, my modest savings, this small house, the possessions I'd gathered over a lifetime had become a battleground. I'd never updated my will after finalizing my divorce from Gerald many years ago, mostly because I assumed Marianne would naturally inherit everything. She was my only child, and until recently, it felt like a foregone conclusion. But the more Marianne distanced herself, and the more she attempted to sabotage Ramona's caregiving, the more I questioned whether leaving everything to her was truly right. Money and property aren't just objects. They carry the symbolism of our love, our gratitude, our final say in the story of who we are and what we value. In the quiet of the evening, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, images of the grandkids blowing out birthday candles, snapshots of Marianne from her college graduation. I wanted to recapture some sense of the bond we once shared, but each photo was tinged with a memory of how she'd either dismissed my efforts or criticized my involvement. And then there was Ramona. In just a few months, she had done more than fill a nursing role. She'd become a genuine friend. She listened to me reminisce about the days when Marianne was small, about my regrets in marriage, about my quiet hopes for the future. However short that future might be, she encouraged me to remain hopeful without ever pushing false optimism. If I was feeling low, she'd sit beside me until the wave passed. If I was feeling strong, she'd help me plan a new set of herbs to grow in a windowsill planter. The deep-seated fear I wrestled with every night was that my life had been spent in the service of others. First, my husband, then Marianne, and finally my grandkids. And I had little to show for it, but an ailing body and a fracturing family. But perhaps I had more choice than I realized. Perhaps I could rewrite the ending in a way that honored the devotion I'd given instead of being overshadowed by Marianne's accusations. That realization propelled me to pick up the phone and call Mr. Finch, the lawyer who helped me navigate my divorce all those years ago. His voice was older now, more cautious, but still brimming with the patience and empathy I remembered. We set an appointment for the following Thursday, and I decided not to tell Marianne. This was a choice I needed to make on my own. Thursday arrived gray and drizzly, the typical Oregon gloom that seemed to mirror my own apprehension. Ramona drove me into the city, making sure I was bundled up against the damp cold. As we navigated the busy streets, I noticed how my reflection in the side view mirror was a ghost of the woman I used to be. Short, wavy silver hair framing a face far more tired than I'd like to admit. But there was a stubborn flicker in my eyes, a resolve that I clung to, like a life raft. Mr. Finch's office was on the third floor of an older brick building. The elevator creaked as we ascended. Ramona offered to wait downstairs, but I asked her to come in with me. She was, after all, part of my life now, my primary support. I wanted her there even if she stayed quietly in the background. Mr. Finch greeted us warmly. He'd aged, of course, but there was something comforting about the way he remembered little details, like how I took my coffee with a single sugar cube and no cream. After the initial pleasantries, we got down to business. I explained how Marianne and I had grown estranged, how I'd been raising her kids for so many years, and how she had become resentful. Particularly now that I was ill, Mr. Finch nodded occasionally, scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. Then came the topic of my will. I told him I wanted to set up educational trusts for Asher and Lily, my beloved grandkids, who'd never done anything to hurt me. More importantly, though, I wanted to leave the house to Ramona, not as a reward, but as an acknowledgement that she'd given me something priceless in my final years. Dignity and genuine love. Mr. Finch paused his gaze, flicking over to Ramona, who looked down at her shoes as though the spotlight was too intense. He asked a few questions about my state of mind, about whether I felt coerced. I answered honestly, no one has forced me into this. This is my choice. After we concluded, I felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief because I'd taken back control of my own life, even if only symbolically. Fear because I knew once Marianne found out, a storm of epic proportions would likely follow. But I was too tired to let fear dictate my choices anymore. As if the universe could sense my newfound resolve, Marianne appeared the very next afternoon unannounced. I was resting on the couch, a plush throw over my legs, while Ramona cleaned the kitchen. Marianne strode in without a hello, her sleek black bob swaying as she scanned the living room. "You look pale," she said, as if her presence alone warranted improvement. She settled into the armchair opposite me, crossing her legs at the ankle posture, rigid. "We need to talk." I swallowed, noticing Ramona hover in the doorway. Towel in hand, about what? The kids said your nurse, she spat the word like it was dirty, has been driving them to school. If you're that weak, maybe you need to be in a proper facility. I felt my blood pressure rise, my heart thudding against my rib cage. It wasn't just the insult to Ramona. It was the implication that I couldn't decide how to live out my own days. I'm fine here, I said, and Ramona is helping me stay in my home, which is what I want. Where are you listening from, dear friend? I'm here in my cozy little studio in Vermont. Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe if this story touched your heart. Marianne's jaw clenched. Well, you're not thinking clearly. The medication, the treatments, it's too much. You need professional oversight. Ramona is a professional, I countered, voice trembling with anger. And she has more compassion than most people who claim to take care of others. Her gaze flicked toward Ramona, who stood silent, uncertain whether to stay or leave. I don't trust her, Marianne said, letting the statement hang. I want someone from a reputable agency, someone who doesn't have personal stakes in all this. That was it. The insinuation that Ramona was in this for financial gain was too cruel, too baseless. I struggled to sit upright, refusing to show weakness. Get out, I said quietly, each word weighted with finality. Excuse me. Marianne's eyes widened. You heard me? I took a breath, steeling myself. Until you can treat me and Ramona with respect, you're not welcome in this home. For a heartbeat, I thought she might apologize or soften, but instead she rose from the chair, grabbed her purse, and marched out without another word. The door slammed, making me flinch. Ramona exhaled, dropping the towel. She came over and gently touched my shoulder. I'm sorry, she whispered. You have nothing to be sorry for. I replied, exhaustion pouring through every muscle in my body. I just can't do this dance with her anymore. Over the next few weeks, my life settled into a pattern of quiet determination. Ramona and I fell into a comforting routine, medication schedules, short walks, restful afternoons. Some days Asher and Lily popped by on their bikes, eager to share stories about school or show me their latest achievements. Other days, I endured the harsh side effects of chemotherapy alone, drifting in and out of a restless sleep while Ramona kept watch. Marianne's absence became a predictable hole in my life. She didn't call, didn't text, didn't bother to ask if I needed anything. Part of me felt relieved not to deal with her negativity, but another part, a stubborn motherly part, mourned the loss of what could have been a supportive relationship. Despite everything, I loved her. That love had been the axis around which I'd built my entire life. Now it felt like the axis was gone, and I was rediscovering my own center of gravity. One rainy afternoon, Ramona and I sat in the living room sipping chamomile tea. The sound of pattering raindrops on the windows provided a soothing backdrop. She took a hesitant breath and said, Lucille, I've been meaning to ask, how are you really? I knew what she meant, not just physically, but emotionally. The truth was, I oscillated between a fragile hope that maybe Marianne would come around and a deep resignation that our relationship was beyond repair. Sometimes I'd dream about a reconciliation. Other times I'd wake up certain that my daughter had chosen a path that excluded true empathy for me. I'm learning to accept things, I said at last, searching for the right words. I hate the tension, but I'm too tired to keep fighting. I wish she'd see that I'm not the enemy. Ramona nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. People project their hurts onto others, she said. Maybe she's battling her own guilt. I forced a small smile. Maybe. But part of me wondered if Marianne simply saw me as an obstacle, someone who had the audacity to leave her father, then the audacity to get sick, then the audacity to hire a nurse she couldn't control. That afternoon, I realized the final battles in my life might not be against cancer alone. They might be battles for self-respect and the simple right to determine who stands at my bedside. A call from Mr. Finch disrupted what little peace I'd found. He spoke with a careful, measured tone, informing me that Marianne had contacted his office. Apparently, she suspected I was making changes to my will, changes that might not favor her. I felt my heart sink as I listened. Even though part of me had expected this, it still stung like betrayal made fresh. The conversation ended with Finch promising to keep our documents secure and reminding me of my rights. She can contest it, he said, but as long as we demonstrate your sound mind, it won't hold water. I hung up and stared at the phone for a long time. This was happening. The hypothetical war I dreaded was becoming a reality. Marianne wasn't simply estranged. She was prepared to fight legally for something I had yet to finalize. It was as if she assumed she had an automatic claim on my life's work, my home, my savings, regardless of how she treated me in my final days. That night, I told Ramona. She listened quietly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm so sorry," she said after a moment. "I feel like this is all my fault." I looked at her, surprised by her sense of responsibility. "It's not your fault. This is about Marianne, not you." "Still," she continued, "if I wasn't here, if you hadn't hired me, maybe she wouldn't be so angry." I let out a sad laugh. "Trust me, she'd find a way to be angry. I've spent years trying to please her, and it's never enough." Ramona sighed and her eyes flicked toward the window, where the faint glow of a street lamp illuminated the early autumn leaves. "I just want you to have peace. That's all, peace." The word lingered in my mind like a faint echo. More than anything, that's what I craved. Peace from the guilt, from the blame, from the sense that no matter what I did, it would never be good enough for my daughter. I thought about my will, about the educational trust for Asher and Lily, about leaving the house to Ramona. Maybe in the final chapter of my life, I could finally choose a path that honored what I'd given and what I still deserved. I tried to prepare for Marianne's next move, but there was no predicting her exact tactics. Instead, I focused on the holidays looming ahead. Autumn was slipping into winter, and even though my energy was waning, I still hoped for a semblance of warmth and togetherness. Maybe, just maybe, the festive season would thaw the ice between us. One crisp November afternoon, I summoned enough strength to bake a batch of sugar cookies, an old family recipe. My arms trembled from the effort of kneading dough, but Ramona helped guiding my hands when they shook, reminding me to rest every few minutes. The smell of vanilla and butter filled the small kitchen, evoking memories of Marianne as a child, her eyes lighting up whenever she saw me in my apron. Back then, she'd hang on to my short, wavy hair and ask to decorate cookies with colorful sprinkles. She'd laugh every time she dropped them on the floor, giggling as she tried to toss them onto the tray. By the time we finished, I was exhausted. Ramona insisted I sit at the table while she cleaned the counters. I nearly dozed off. My eyes half-lidded the chair, feeling too comfortable to leave. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Marianne. "We should talk. I'll come by tomorrow." The next morning, she arrived with a gravity that felt different from her usual stormy entrance. She took off her coat and for once asked how I was feeling. My suspicions flared. A sudden show of concern often precedes a demand, but I offered a polite response, ignoring the dread tightening in my chest. She drew a breath. "Listen, Mom, I know we haven't seen eye to eye, but the kids miss coming around. Things have just been busy." I nodded, waiting. "They're always welcome here," I said. Her eyes flickered. "About that, I'm worried about the environment you're keeping them in, with all your medical stuff. It might not be healthy." It stung. Her words were veiled, but the implication was that I, sick and frail, somehow posed a risk to my own grandchildren. Or maybe she was talking about Ramona again, trying a new angle. My mouth opened, but the words snagged in my throat. All I could muster was a tired, "They're my grandkids, Marianne." She nodded curtly and began tapping on her phone as though the conversation was concluded. I realized then that she hadn't come to mend fences at all. She'd come to poke at them, test their durability, see where she might knock them down. Next days later, the next blow fell. A letter arrived in the mail, an official notice of intent to challenge my mental competency regarding my estate. My heart pounded as I skimmed the legal language. Marianne was claiming that I wasn't of sound mind, that I'd been unduly influenced. By Ramona, presumably, I felt an immediate surge of nausea more potent than any chemo side effect. She was trying to paint me as incompetent as though my decisions were products of confusion and manipulation. Me who had raised her, who had stayed up countless nights tending to her fevers, who had spent 15 years taking her kids under my wing. Now I was being declared mentally unfit because I refused to bow to her demands. Ramona found me clutching the letter at the kitchen table, my breathing ragged. She leaned over to read it, her expression going from shock to dismay. "I can't believe this," she said, hands shaking. "I'm so sorry, I should have left earlier. Maybe this wouldn't have happened." "Stop," I cut in voice firmer than I expected. "This has nothing to do with you. It's about Marianne's inability to handle that she can't control me." That afternoon, Mr. Finch confirmed what the letter stated. Marianne had begun filing preliminary paperwork, setting the stage for a formal legal contest if I followed through on any changes to my will. Though the claim was flimsy, my medical team could testify I was still fully competent. Fighting it would be draining emotionally and financially. As if on cue, the phone rang. It was Marianne. I let it go to voicemail, not trusting myself to speak without unleashing a flood of anger. Later, I listened to her message. "Mom, I'm doing what's best for you. You're not thinking straight. That nurse is clouding your judgment. Call me back." I deleted the message, my hand trembling. Tears pricked my eyes as I realized that in her mind she was justified. She truly believed she was doing the right thing, or at least she convinced herself of that. Sometimes people can twist reality until it matches their narrative, leaving no room for empathy or truth. Ramona helped me to the couch, setting a soft pillow behind my back. We sat side by side in silence, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. In that moment, I thought about how deeply love and hate can intertwine, how the line between them can blur when someone feels threatened or betrayed, and how in sickness you discover who really sees you as a person worth fighting for. Time passed in a haze of hospital visits and legal consultations. Between chemo sessions, I found myself more often in waiting rooms than in my own living room. My body was tired, but my mind kept me awake with endless loops of what if and if only. Ramona never faltered. She'd help me from the car to the clinic, settle me into a seat, and wait patiently with me for the nurses to call my name. After each session, we'd drive home in near silence, the side effects creeping up in waves of nausea and bone-deep fatigue. Christmas lights began to appear in the neighborhood, twinkling testaments to a season of peace and goodwill that felt achingly distant from my own reality. I looked at those lights one evening from the window and wondered if Marianne was putting up a tree with Asher and Lily, if they were baking cookies like we once did together. I missed them fiercely, my grandchildren, and even to some degree the daughter I used to know. "Any word from Marianne?" Ramona asked gently one night, sensing my mood. I shook my head. "Just the lawyers, nothing personal." The last we'd heard, Marianne was gathering witnesses to testify to my deteriorating state. Witnesses in this case seemed to mean a few neighbors and distant relatives who'd rarely stepped foot in my house, but had heard rumors. Gossip is a wicked currency, easily spent and impossible to fully trace. I thought about contacting Marianne, trying to reason with her, reminding her of the life we'd shared before things spiraled out of control. But whenever I picked up the phone, I remembered her accusations, how she wanted me declared incompetent. how she called Ramona a manipulator. Reaching out felt like stepping into a trap, a labyrinth of blame and hostility. Instead, I wrote a few letters to Asher and Lily, letters they might someday read if the legal battles pushed us even further apart. I told them how proud I was to be their grandmother, how I wished them boundless courage and kindness. I tucked the letters away in a shoebox, tears staining the edges. One day I hoped they'd understand that what I did, every decision I made, was not about money or vengeance, but about choosing a life where my dignity wasn't up for debate. That December, in the midst of swirling snowflakes and swirling emotions, I received a small miracle. My oncologist informed me that my latest scans showed a slower progression than anticipated. It wasn't a cure, but it was a reprieve, a hint that I might have more time than initially feared. Ramona was overjoyed, immediately suggesting a celebratory dinner, even if it was just simple soup and bread. My own reaction was more subdued, tempered by the knowledge that the battle with Marianne still raged on the periphery of my life. Yet for one evening, we allowed ourselves to bask in the small victory. Ramona helped me dress in a warm sweater, brushing out my short silver waves to make me feel presentable. We even turned on some holiday tunes. The smell of fresh bread filled the kitchen, blending with the faint notes of cinnamon from a candle Ramona lit. For a moment, I remembered what joy felt like, not the forced politeness of family gatherings, but a quiet, genuine contentment that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Midway through our meal, there was a knock at the door. My heart jumped. It was Marianne standing on the threshold, snow dusting the shoulders of her black coat. She stepped inside, her gaze bouncing between Ramona and me. I recognized the tension in her eyes, but there was also a flicker of something like remorse. I heard about your test results, she said softly. Congratulations. I set down my spoon, bracing myself. Thank you. She inhaled, glancing at the cozy scene. Smells nice in here. Ramona offered a small smile but wisely retreated to the kitchen, giving us space. Marianne took a seat, still clutching her coat, as though she wasn't sure she'd stay. Mom, she began, her voice low. I'm worried about how this is all going. Lawyers' wills. It's getting out of control. My eyebrows rose. You're the one who started it. She flinched, looking away. I I want to make sure you're safe, that no one's taking advantage of you. Can you blame me for that? Taking advantage, I repeated, anger simmering. Ramona has given me more care than you ever have. She hasn't asked for a dime beyond her salary. Why do you assume the worst? Marianne paused, biting her lip. For an instant, I thought she might apologize or drop the lawsuit, but the next words she spoke dashed those hopes. I still think we need an impartial evaluation of your mental state, just to be sure. My vision blurred with tears of anger. An impartial evaluation, I echoed. You want a stranger to poke around my home, examine my decision-making, all because you can't accept that I'm capable of choosing who to trust. She shrugged as though it were a logical step. It's for everyone's peace of mind. The kids, the extended family, they're all asking questions. And if you have nothing to hide, why not prove it? I couldn't believe her audacity, the nerve to come into my home where I was celebrating a rare moment of hope and suggest that I submit to some invasive test just to satisfy her, her own mother who had cared for her children for 15 years, without question. I mustered every ounce of composure I had left Marianne. I said, my tone wavering between sorrow and fury. This isn't about the kids or the family. It's about control. And I'm done letting you manipulate the narrative. She started to protest, but I held up a trembling hand. No, I said firmly. No more. I'm not doing your evaluation, and I'm not feeding into your paranoia. If you want to test my competency, go through the courts, but don't think for a second that I'll just roll over. A silence descended so thick it felt suffocating. Marianne blinked, clearly taken aback by my refusal. In the corner of the room, Ramona quietly cleaned the dishes, the soft clinking of plates, the only sound. Finally, Marianne stood a heaviness in her posture that suggested a mix of defeat and defiance. Then I guess we'll have to let the lawyers figure it out, she said, voice cold and resigned. She turned to leave, pausing at the door. I don't know what you see in that nurse, she added under her breath, but you'll regret siding with her over your own daughter. She left without waiting for a reply, the door snapping shut behind her. My shoulders sagged and I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. In that moment, I was torn between heartbreak and resolve. No matter how this ended, I knew one truth. I'd never compromise my dignity to appease Marianne's baseless fears again. Ramona came to me then, drying her hands on a dishcloth. Are you all right? She asked softly, her cropped chestnut hair framing her face in a worried halo. I nodded, though tears threatened to escape. I'm sorry you had to hear that, I said, my voice trembling. You don't deserve any of this. She shook her head. Don't apologize. I'm here because I care about you. Not just as a patient, but as a friend. Emotion welled up in my chest. For so long, I'd chased my daughter's approval like a distant star, always just out of reach. Now, amid all the conflict, someone else had stepped into my life, offering the grace and empathy I'd yearned for. But I knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. Marianne was entrenched in her stance, and the legal pressure was mounting like storm clouds on the horizon. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed Marianne's parting words. You'll regret siding with her over your own daughter. Maybe under different circumstances, regret would have weighed heavily on me. But I knew in my heart that I wasn't siding with anyone. I was asserting my right to be cared for with respect and compassion. For once, I was standing up for what I needed. Despite the mental and physical fatigue, a strange calm settled over me. The test results had given me a second wind, a sense that I wasn't about to collapse under the weight of illness or stress. If Marianne wanted a legal fight, I would do my best to handle it with dignity. I wouldn't sink to insults or manipulations. I would simply let the facts speak, my medical records, my mental evaluations from my doctor, the unwavering support Ramona provided. As I drifted off to sleep, I remembered a piece of wisdom an old friend once told me. Family is who shows up when the chips are down, not just who shares your blood. If that was true, then Ramona was more like family than Marianne had been for a long time. The legal entanglement rolled forward with agonizing slowness over the weeks that followed. Letters from lawyers piled up, each one demanding more documentation, more proof that I was making decisions under my own volition. The constant reminders drained me, threatening to overshadow the fragile progress in my cancer treatment. But Ramona stayed steadfast, helping me file each document in an organized binder and offering a steady presence whenever anxiety threatened to consume me. Meanwhile, the holiday season came and went in a subdued hush. I decorated a tiny artificial tree, placing it on a small table in the corner of the living room. Ramona and I exchanged small gifts. She gave me a hand-knit scarf in a soft teal color that brightened my complexion, and I managed to order her a stethoscope with her name engraved in elegant script. We laughed about the practicality of our gifts, but there was a genuine warmth in the simplicity of the exchange. Marianne was absent throughout it all, choosing not to bring Asher and Lily over, even for Christmas morning. I tried not to let the void crush my spirits, reminding myself that the children would one day understand the truth. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and see an older woman who had lost so much. But then I'd notice the spark in my eyes, a small, tenacious light that refused to be extinguished. By January, the courts had scheduled a preliminary hearing to address Marianne's claim of undue influence. Mr. Finch assured me we had every advantage. My oncologist was willing to attest to my mental clarity, and Ramona had meticulously logged every medication and every decision we'd made together. Still, the tension gnawed at me. Would a judge see through Marianne's motives? Would my final days be consumed by legal battles instead of peaceful reflection? One cold afternoon, as I sat by the window watching gray clouds drift across the sky, Ramona handed me a cup of peppermint tea. "You'll get through this," she said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I nodded, wanting to believe her. But some part of me wondered if Marianne's vendetta would ever truly end, or if she'd carry this bitterness long after I was gone. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you feel like staying a little longer with me, don't forget to subscribe. It truly means the world. When the day of the hearing arrived, I felt more fragile than ever. Chemo had worn me down, leaving me prone to dizziness and aches that never seemed to fade. Yet I found a quiet determination somewhere deep in my gut. Ramona helped me dress in a simple navy blouse and a long skirt, my short silver hair pinned back neatly. I wanted to look composed, not pitiful. I wanted to show Marianne and the world that I still possessed a voice, a will, and a mind of my own. Mr. Finch met us at the courthouse, guiding us through the corridors to a small wood-paneled room where a judge, a clerk, and a smattering of legal aides waited. Marianne was there too, dressed in a tailored black suit, her sleek bob shining under the fluorescent lights. She avoided my gaze, focusing instead on her lawyer. My heart clenched at the sight of her, remembering the little girl who used to run to me after school. With scraped knees, seeking comfort, the proceedings began. Marianne's lawyer argued that I was in a weakened mental state due to my illness, suggesting that Ramona, a mere hired nurse, had gained undue influence. He pointed to my changes in routine, my reliance on Ramona for daily tasks, as though those were signs of manipulation rather than necessary assistance. It was surreal hearing him twist every act of kindness Ramona had shown me into something sinister. Then Mr. Finch presented my side, calmly stating that I had voluntarily hired Ramona, that I had the support of my medical team, and that I continued to make my own decisions. Ramona took the stand, her voice steady as she recounted the care I required her daily tasks and the professional boundaries she upheld. I watched Marianne's expression shift between indignation and uncertainty as Ramona spoke with poise and honesty. Finally, I was asked to speak. My legs trembled as I rose, but I steadied myself against the table. I explained how I had raised Marianne, how I cared for Asher and Lily, and how I only asked for a shred of gratitude in return. I described how Ramona had stepped in when my own daughter chose distance instead of support. My voice cracked a few times, but I pressed on, determined to show that my choices were born of clarity, not confusion. When I finished, the room fell silent. The judge nodded solemnly, indicating that she'd take the evidence under advisement. The hearing adjourned, leaving me emotionally spent, but oddly relieved. We had told the truth, and I hoped it would be enough. It took a few weeks for the judge to issue a ruling. Meanwhile, Marianne maintained her distance, as though waiting for the legal outcome to justify her next move. Asher and Lily sent me a few text messages, childish updates about their lives, photos of school projects, but no visits. I suspected Marianne controlled their schedules more tightly than ever. When the ruling finally arrived, it came in the form of a terse legal document that Mr. Finch brought to my home. I opened it with trembling fingers. Ramona and Mr. Finch both at my side, bracing for news that could change everything. A wave of relief crashed over me as my eyes landed on the judge's key determination. There is no sufficient evidence to suggest Mrs. Warner lacks mental competency or has been subjected to undue influence. The court recognizes her autonomy in estate decisions. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I thanked Mr. Finch profusely. Ramona let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks. For a moment, it felt like we'd finally reached the end of a punishing odyssey, but reality soon sank in. A legal victory wouldn't magically mend the rift with Marianne. It merely affirmed that my choices were valid in the eyes of the law. Within days, Marianne called, her voice crisp and businesslike. "So you won," she said, devoid of warmth. "Congratulations, Marianne." I began. It was never about winning or losing. It was about, she cut me off. Let's not pretend this was some noble quest. You've humiliated me. My heart twisted. She saw this as an attack on her reputation, not a defense of my right to live on my own terms. The door is always open, Marianne, I said quietly. I may not have much time left, but I'd like to spend it in peace with Asher and Lily, and even with you if you want. A cold laugh echoed through the phone. You sided with your nurse over your own daughter, and now you talk about peace. Don't hold your breath. She hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling an emptiness that no legal triumph could fill. Ramona placed a hand on my shoulder. You did what was right, she whispered. That's all you can do. Despite Marianne's hostility, life did settle into a calmer rhythm. For a time, I continued my treatments, battling the cancer with a stubborn determination that surprised even my doctors. Ramona was there every step of the way, finding new methods to keep my spirits up. An audiobook here, a gentle exercise regimen there. She even convinced me to start journaling, insisting that writing down my feelings might help me process the emotional roller coaster I'd been on. And so, I wrote about my regrets, my hopes, the love I still held for Marianne, and the profound gratitude I felt toward Ramona. In those journal pages, I confronted truths I'd long buried. Yes, I had left my marriage to save myself. But that didn't mean I loved Marianne any less. Yes, I had grown weary of her demands, but part of me understood she was grappling with her own wounds, perhaps from her father, perhaps from me, or perhaps from life in general. Yet understanding her hurt didn't mean I had to sacrifice my own well-being. One mild spring afternoon, Asher and Lily showed up unannounced. They rang the doorbell, a shy excitement in their eyes. Mom said we could bike over, Asher announced, though I suspected they'd simply taken it upon themselves. Lily lugged a small backpack filled with coloring books and markers, determined to show me her latest art project. The sight of them rekindled a joy in me I hadn't felt for months. We sat in the living room, the windows open to let in a gentle breeze. Ramona brought out lemonade and cookies, and for a few hours, I forgot about the tension with Marianne. We laughed, chatted about school, and even made plans to plant a small herb garden in pots on the back porch. Lily's eyes lit up when I mentioned basil and parsley. Asher asked if we could plant tomatoes. It was the kind of ordinary moment that felt extraordinary after so many storms. They left before dusk, promising to come again. After they were gone, Ramona and I found ourselves sitting on the porch steps. She looked at me with a hopeful smile. See, she said softly, it's not all lost. You still have them. I nodded, tears prickling my eyes. Maybe everything wasn't perfect, but in that moment, I had enough a reminder of what love without conditions could feel like. Thank you so much for joining us today on her Fireside Stories. This powerful journey reminds us all that family isn't only defined by blood, but by those who stand beside us when life gets tough. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in this grandmother's position? Do you think she was right to rewrite her story? Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to mention where you're tuning in from. Remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming stories. Until next time, take care and keep your own fireside burning bright.